Long before the city received the name by which the world now knows it, evening moved across a high valley in central Mexico. The Great Pyramids were already old by the middle of the 5th century. Their stepped profiles held the last brightness above a city of straight roads, walled residences, workshops, courtyards, and painted rooms. From a distance, the monuments seemed to command the whole plain. Closer to the ground, most lives unfolded behind lower walls. The air between the walls still holds the warmth of the day, but the open courts are already cooling. Teotihuacan is a later name. Centuries after the city had changed and much of it had fallen silent, the Mexica encountered its ruins and placed them within their sacred history. The people living here, around 450 CE, left no surviving account of what they called the city, or what language filled its courtyards. Their name has disappeared. Their streets, drains, vessels, tools, pigments, and burials remain, carrying human intention across a very long silence. This episode enters a representative archaeological night, rather than reconstructing one recorded date. No diary preserves the exact weather, meal, conversation, or hour when one household withdrew indoors. Archaeology offers another kind of closeness. Paths worn by movement, drains shaped for water, obsidian working surfaces, painted walls, and compounds arranged for several families. Material traces bring the city near without supplying an intimacy the evidence cannot support. A threshold polished by feet and a drain repaired more than once can be as intimate as a written voice. By 450 CE, Teotihuacan stood near the height of its long urban life. The city had grown during the first centuries of the Common Era and would continue changing after this evening had passed. Its central monuments drew pilgrims, officials, workers, and visitors. Beyond it stretched neighborhoods in which ordinary routines gave the metropolis its daily weight. A metropolis at its height is therefore approached from the household outward, not from the pyramid downward. The night begins without a ruler entering the avenue and without a procession claiming the scene. A broad city does not need spectacle in order to feel immense. A doorway narrows. A courtyard loses color. A stone blade is set down where it can be found again. Above the roofs, the pyramids remain visible for a little longer, not as mysteries waiting to be solved, but as familiar structures beside thousands of homes. The first quiet act is simply the return of attention from the skyline to the nearest hand. Teotihuacan spread across many square kilometers of the valley and reached a scale few ancient cities in the Americas matched. UNESCO uses a conservative minimum of 25,000 inhabitants, while archaeological estimates often rise higher. The number remains debated. For this evening, the essential fact is simpler. Darkness is settling over a true metropolis, not an isolated temple precinct. Its immensity becomes legible through domestic distances repeated thousands of times. One courtyard, one doorway, and one carried vessel repeat until the scale becomes human. The urban plan followed a disciplined geometry. The long avenue known today as the Avenue of the Dead ran slightly east of north, and streets branched from the same orientation into a broad grid. The San Juan River itself was redirected to pass through this planned landscape. Order therefore appeared not only in monuments but in movement, a turn at a wall, a drainage channel, a straight route between compounds, and a horizon repeatedly framed by architecture. Even the altered river becomes part of a household night, once water reaches a jar, drain, or plastered court. The Pyramid of the Moon marked the northern end of the central avenue, while the Pyramid of the Sun rose farther south. Those names are later, and the original meanings remain uncertain. Around 450 CE, residents encountered active sacred and civic structures, maintained through labor, memory, and institutions whose precise political form is still debated. Whatever the monuments were called, their mass changed how nearby walls received shadow. Researchers have not found the kind of royal portrait tradition that would make one named monarch the easy center of the story. Some scholars have proposed collective, oligarchic, or council-based forms of rule. Others continue to debate how authority was organized. The uncertainty should remain visible. What the city plan demonstrates with greater confidence is sustained coordination. Roads, riverworks, monuments, residential construction, and neighborhood organization persisted across generations. Coordination is visible in the city's endurance, even where the names of decision-makers have disappeared. As evening deepens, great distances contract into practical ones. A worker no longer measures the city from pyramid to pyramid, but from street to entrance, from entrance to courtyard, from courtyard to a family room. The metropolis becomes a sequence of thresholds. The monumental axis may still hold the sky, yet the approaching night belongs increasingly to the smaller measurements that tell a person where food, tools, water, relatives, and shelter are waiting. The city scale becomes restful when it is broken into routes that one tired body can complete. During the day, the central avenue could connect ceremonies, exchange, administration, and movement through the city. At night, it would not become empty all at once. People leaving different tasks would turn away at different points. A bundle would pass from one shoulder to another. Sandals would meet packed ground and plastered surfaces. The broad road would lose activity by degrees, as smaller streets drew residents back toward the compounds where most of the population lived. A broad civic space becomes intimate whenever footsteps separate, and each person chooses a familiar side street. The avenue's modern name, like the modern names of the pyramids, belongs to later interpretation. To 5th century residents, the route carried meanings that are only partly recoverable. Architecture aligned bodies with platforms, plazas, mountain forms, and controlled views. Yet the sacred route also had ordinary edges. Steps gathered dust, walls required repair, and children and older residents knew it as part of the way through their city. As light falls, a final figure leaves the open width and turns toward a wall already familiar. Public architecture often used the sloping and panel form now called talud tablero. The pattern became one of Teotihuacan's clearest architectural signatures and influenced buildings far beyond the valley. Here it reigns a visual rhythm rather than a lesson. Angled masonry beneath a vertical panel, shadow gathering under an edge, and repeated geometry holding its shape after the platform is empty. The city's influence reached across Mesoamerica through art, trade, diplomacy, migration, religious forms, and at times, political force. Objects and styles associated with Teotihuacan appear far beyond central Mexico. But a person turning homeward need not carry the entire map of influence in mind. The distant network arrives in smaller forms, an unfamiliar ceramic, marine shell from far away, a stone whose source lies beyond the valley, or news carried by someone who speaks differently. Long-distance influence reaches the senses as weight, texture, color, and unfamiliar craftsmanship before it becomes history. The avenue now offers fewer voices. Its width becomes more noticeable when movement thins. The great structures do not disappear. They become darker masses that organize the open sky. Along the edges, doorways and side routes matter more. One by one, the city's public surfaces surrender attention to residential walls. The night is not closing the metropolis. It is redistributing it, drawing life away from the monumental center and into thousands of enclosed domestic worlds. The center remains awake in architecture, while human attention moves toward food, kin, storage, and rest. Much of Teotihuacan consisted of residential compounds. Archaeologists estimate that roughly 2,000 to 2,300 once stood across the city, and that a large majority of residents lived within them. These were not modern apartment buildings rising in stacked floors. They were mostly single-story, walled complexes divided into several household suites, with rooms and patios arranged around shared or linked courtyards. From above, they would resemble a field of enclosed rectangles, but from within each one contained a different social map. A compound could house many people, often several extended households, while still preserving internal boundaries. Archaeologists, studying floor plans, distinguish separate dwelling groups within the same outer enclosure. Cooperation did not erase privacy, status, or disagreement. A shared wall might hold related families, craft partners, ritual obligations, and economic ties together. Yet each group could maintain its own rooms, storage, cooking areas, and immediate routines. The same enclosure could support cooperation in one court and careful separation only a few steps away. The compounds varied greatly. Some were carefully built from stone, lime plaster, and well-finished floors. Others used more modest combinations of stone and adobe. Decoration, room size, construction quality, and artifact assemblages reveal differences in wealth and position. The city was not socially equal. Still, its widespread investment in substantial multifamily housing remains unusual in the ancient world and helps explain why the residential city is as important as the pyramids. Comfort, finish, and access were distributed unevenly, and the script keeps those differences visible after dark. From the street, an outer wall limited what could be seen. Entry often passed through a controlled opening rather than exposing every courtyard at once. The enclosure reduced wind, noise, dust, and casual access. It also turned the household world inward. A person arriving near evening crossed from the long geometry of the city into a sequence of smaller spaces, each with its own surfaces, smells, tools, and remembered places. The threshold is therefore both protection and information, telling residents where the public city ends. Tonight, no single compound is presented as a perfect model for all the rest. Tititla, Zakwala, Yayahuala, Tepantitla, Atetoko, Lavantilla, and Tulajinga preserve different combinations of status, craft, ritual, chronology, and excavation history. The representative residence in this story draws only from features documented across such settings. Where the evidence varies, the narration keeps the variation rather than building one impossible house from every famous discovery. Variation is not a problem to solve. It is evidence that Teotihuacan contained many kinds of urban household. The outer entrance changes the sound of the city. Beyond it, the avenue becomes distant, and the scrape of a sandal or the movement of a vessel is held by walls. The passage may bend or narrow before opening toward an interior court. Such controlled access makes the compound feel larger from within than it appeared from the street. One doorway can contain a network of rooms, patios, drains, shrines, workshops, and family spaces. The enclosure changes pace before it changes temperature, asking the body to become careful rather than hurried. A returning resident carries no invented biography here. The person may have worked stone, pottery, pigment, fiber, food, exchange, or administration. What matters is the physical transition. A burden is lowered. Dust is brushed from a garment. A tool is checked for damage before it is placed aside. The body that crossed the city now adjusts to a more enclosed pace. A familiar wall receives the tool with less ceremony than a workshop display, and that ordinariness matters. Near the entrance, objects that must travel again remain accessible. Baskets, cords, carrying frames, jars, and work materials could not be allowed to block circulation. Archaeological remains rarely preserve the exact placement of perishable household goods on one evening, so the scene stays general. It emphasizes the logic of a busy compound. Passages must remain usable, fragile objects must be protected, and materials must be kept near the people responsible for them. Perishable objects are absent from excavation, but the need to protect circulation is written into the surviving plan. The doorway also marks social knowledge. Residents know which room belongs to which household, which court receives visitors, where ritual activity is appropriate, and which work surface can still be used after daylight fades. An outsider may see repeated walls. A resident sees permissions, relationships, memories, and obligations. The built environment does not merely shelter community. It organizes the community into a pattern learned through daily movement. Architecture becomes social memory when a person can move correctly through it without stopping to think. By the time the last color leaves the entrance, the compound has become a world of partial views. A wall hides one room while revealing another. A court opens upward but remains enclosed on every side. Voices lose distance. The pyramids are now mostly absent from sight, though their city still determines the orientation of the walls. Monumental order remains outside. Inside, night gathers around human scale. The last view back toward the entrance is narrow, framed by surfaces already taking on the color of night. Open courtyards form the breathing spaces of many apartment compounds. Rooms gathered around them, and rainwater drains carried water away from plastered surfaces. In the dry season, the channels could wait empty. In wetter months, they protected circulation and walls. The drain itself shows that residents planned for water moving through enclosed architecture. Above the court, the open square of sky records changing brightness without requiring a particular moon or weather condition. A courtyard could connect households without making every activity communal. People crossed it to reach rooms, work areas, shrines, and other patios. Some courts were more formal, some more practical. A central space might support ritual, conversation, craft, preparation, or simply passage at different times. Archaeology often preserves architecture more clearly than schedules. The same paving can therefore hold several kinds of life without assigning them all to 1 hour. Several households can share a court while hearing the difference between another family's work and their own. As the sky darkens, the courtyard's open center becomes a measure of changing light. Painted wall sections lose their strongest colors first in the corners. Raised platforms become low silhouettes. The drain line remains visible because it interrupts the floor. A person crossing the court does not need a dramatic torchlit scene. A small controlled flame, an ember from food preparation, or light borrowed from an adjacent room would have been enough to define only the nearest surfaces. Limited light does not reveal the whole residence. It creates islands of certainty around the nearest task. The court also carries sound upward. Stone tapped against stone, a vessel set down, a child corrected, a low exchange between adults, and the movement of fiber or cord remain close to their source. Beyond the compound, thousands of other courts are doing something similar. The city's night is not one silence but many enclosed soundscapes, each softened by walls and separated by narrow streets. A city of courtyards can be crowded in population and still feel quiet one enclosure at a time. For sleep history, the courtyard offers a natural turning point. The public city has receded, but the household is not yet still. Work continues in smaller gestures. Materials are counted, food is prepared or stored, children are guided, and domestic ritual may be completed. Above these tasks, the open square of sky grows darker. The courtyard holds that darkness without letting it become empty. The court becomes a gentle clock, measuring evening through visibility rather than through a documented hour. Many Teotihuacan buildings were painted. The surviving murals are especially associated with apartment compounds, where images covered interior walls rather than appearing only on monumental temples. Red grounds, processions, animals, plants, water signs, deities, and richly dressed figures formed visual environments that residents pass every day. The colors visible in museums and reconstructions are fragments of a much larger painted city. Even faded fragments imply rooms that once surrounded residents with continuous images rather than isolated museum pieces. These murals were more than decoration. They helped organize religious ideas, social roles, place, memory, and the relationship between households and the wider city. Their meanings remain debated, and modern divine names can create false certainty. Feathers, streams, flowers, felines, birds, garments, and repeated signs can be described directly, while the ancient residents are allowed to have understood far more than modern scholarship can recover. Pigments required knowledge and labor. Walls had to be prepared, plastered, laid out, painted, maintained, and sometimes repainted. Small grouped pigment jars and traces of color connect large compositions to hands, containers, brushes, and work surfaces. In evening light, those brilliant programs would not glow evenly. A red field might remain visible near a flame while a procession farther along the wall disappeared into shadow. Every painted surface began as material work performed close to the wall, container, brush, and scaffold. Painted rooms also remind us that the compound was not merely functional. Residents invested in beauty, ritual presence, and shared identity. Even households of modest status could participate in a city where architecture and imagery were closely linked, though not every residence possessed the same richness. Status differences matter. The night should not transform all homes into equal painted palaces. A modest house may still value color deeply, while a richer compound can display resources unavailable to its neighbors. As darkness settles, the murals change their role. During the day, they dominate the wall. At night, they become partial companions. A feathered edge, the eye of an animal, a line of water, a hand emerging from red plaster. The unseen portions remain present, because residents already know them. Familiar art does not require full illumination. Memory completes what the small light cannot reach. The wall remains complete in household memory long after the available flame can illuminate only one detail. Teotihuacan's valley depended on water managed across several scales. The city redirected the San Juan River through its planned center, and residential compounds used drains to conduct rainwater away from courts and roofs. Water was therefore both landscape and household problem. It had to be guided, stored, protected, and used without damaging plastered architecture. A city that planned waterways at monumental scale still depended on countless small decisions about where water should rest. No single water routine applied to every household. Compounds differed, seasons changed, and supply remains an active field of research. What can be followed is physical: the heavier balance of a filled jar, a plaster lip guiding runoff, a channel cut with enough slope, and a walking surface kept clear. Water management appears through weight, angle, and repeated attention, rather than through one assigned carrier. A hand reads these conditions through balance before the eye can measure them. Near evening, a vessel is moved from the center of a passage. Damp plaster holds a darker tone than the dry wall beside it. A narrow channel crosses the court and disappears beneath another threshold. The scene needs little motion. Water has already done most of its work by reaching the correct place, leaving only the coolness of the surface and the small adjustment of a container. The vessel settles with a low ceramic weight, and the passage opens again. Water also appears in the city's art. Streams, droplets, aquatic forms, shells, and green stones linked fertility, abundance, and sacred power. Those images should not be confused with a complete explanation of belief. They show that water mattered materially and conceptually. In a highland city where agriculture, rain, drainage, storage, and ritual were inseparable from survival, material need and sacred imagery meet without becoming identical, just as rain and painted water belong to different registers. By night, water is quieter than the system that carries it. A small amount shifts inside clay and settles. The empty drain becomes a dark line through pale plaster. Coolness remains where the surface was recently wet. River engineering, seasonal rain, storage, and domestic caution contract into one calm fact. The compound has guided water away from feet and kept enough close at hand. The last movement is heard rather than seen. A brief touch of water against the vessel wall. Obsidian gave Teotihuacan one of its most distinctive materials. The volcanic glass can fracture into edges sharper than ordinary stone, making it useful for blades, tools, and specialized production. Large quantities move through the city, and excavations have identified workshops where artisans work the material in concentrated sequences. The gleam of a finished edge begins with cores, flakes, waste, skill, and repeated risk to the fingers. Its beauty is inseparable from fracture, and the artisan's control lies in making that dangerous property useful. In the Teotihuacan district and elsewhere, craft activity existed inside or beside residential life. A workshop was not necessarily a separate industrial building cut off from family space. Production could form part of the compound's identity and economy. Debris on floors and infill records repeated work more faithfully than a heroic image of one master artisan. Production debris turns the floor into a record of practice, correction, failure, and repeated improvement. An evening work surface would demand order. Usable pieces should not be mixed carelessly with sharp waste. A blade unfinished at dusk may remain where its stage can be recognized. Fine flakes catch limited light and then disappear when the angle changes. Archaeology cannot tell us that one named worker ended at a particular moment. But the material itself explains why the surface must be cleared with attention. The hand learns to read edges by touch and angle, especially when the remaining light is no longer generous. Obsidian also connected Teotihuacan to sources, routes, control systems, and exchange beyond the compound. Its circulation helped support the city's economy and influence. Yet the household experience of the stone remained tactile. It was cool, hard, reflective, and unforgiving. The broad history of trade entered the room as a small black fragment that could cut food, shape another material, or become part of a ritual offering. A trade network ends for a moment at the fingertips of the person judging one small black surface. When the final piece is set down, the workshop does not become harmless. Edges remain sharp in darkness. A basket or designated area keeps waste from bare feet and passing hands. The scene needs no accident to create its attention. Care itself is the human story, the practiced movement that protects a tool, preserves usable material, and allows a household to begin again in daylight. Order on the work surface is a form of care extended to everyone who will cross the room later. Not every neighborhood specialized in the same work. Pottery production, lapidary work, obsidian working, painting, construction, and fiber-related tasks appear in different concentrations across the city. At Teotihuacan, archaeological research has documented specialized potters and other craftspeople. Elsewhere, objects and wear patterns point toward additional forms of household labor that rarely survive in complete form. A neighborhood's craft identity could be visible in waste, tools, unfinished objects, and the movements repeated between rooms. Clay passes through several states before it becomes a vessel. Selected earth, water, formed walls, drying surfaces, firing, use, breakage, and reuse as fill. A finished pot can appear ordinary because the difficult stages have disappeared into its shape. Near evening, a vessel waiting to dry must remain undisturbed. A fire jar can withstand heat yet still fail if struck against stone. Clay remembers pressure, water, heat, and impact, carrying each stage into the vessel's final strinal strength and weakness. Fiber is harder for archaeology to preserve. Textiles, cords, nets, mats, baskets, and clothing usually decay, leaving tools, impressions, depictions, and traces on human bodies. The evening can show thread gathered from a passage or a cord checked for wear, without assigning every textile task to women or reconstructing a complete garment from one surviving tool. Indirect evidence supports careful gestures, not a finished costume. Household labor crossed age and gender in ways that cannot be reduced to modern assumptions. Children learned by watching and assisting. Adults held different skills and responsibilities. Older residents carried knowledge even when their bodies could no longer perform every task. The compound was both residence and training ground, where repetition transferred techniques that no written manual from the city survives to explain. Skill survives because someone demonstrates pace, pressure, sequence, and restraint until another person can repeat them. As darkness increases, patient work slows before heavy work does. Fingers feel what eyes can no longer judge easily. A cord is wound rather than left loose. A vessel is moved away from the edge of a platform. Pavement is covered. A stone tool is placed against a familiar wall. These are not dramatic gestures, but a city of crafts depends on them. The final arrangement of objects is modest, but it preserves both safety and the continuity of tomorrow's work. Food connects Teotihuacan to the fields, terraces, wetlands, markets, storage rooms, hearths, and grinding tools beyond any single residence. Maize was central, alongside other plant foods, and archaeological research has examined staple preparation as well as evidence for maguey sap use. Animal foods varied by household and neighborhood. The evening should not invent one universal menu for a city of this size. The city's monumental scale rests every day on food systems that leave quieter marks than pyramids do. Grinding maize required time and bodily effort. Stone tools preserve wear from repeated use, while cooking vessels and food residues provide other evidence of preparation. In a compound, this labor could be distributed across households and days. The sound of stone moving over stone is therefore plausible as part of domestic life, but the script does not claim that every family performed the same task at the same hour. Repeated grinding transforms both grain and stone, making duration visible in the wear of a working surface. Maguey offered fiber, food-related products, and sap tortoise. Pottery studies have identified vessels associated with processing or consuming fermented agave sap at Teotihuacan. That evidence reveals dietary practice without licensing a celebratory drinking scene. A container can remain part of household provisioning, exchange, ritual, or social life without turning the night into spectacle. A specialized vessel can support several social uses without proving one exact scene of consumption. The hearth or cooking area concentrates heat, smoke, tools, and risk. In an apartment compound, food preparation spaces belong to specific dwelling groups, rather than to one giant communal kitchen for everyone. The smell of warm maize or heated clay may travel farther than the food itself, crossing a court while walls preserve household boundaries. Heat gathers households near practical work while smoke and odor cross boundaries more freely than people do. When food work ends, its evidence remains in small arrangements, a grinding stone no longer moving, a vessel protected from dust, fuel conserved, crumbs and husks gathered, heat declining slowly. What remains visible is preparation rather than one recoverable menu. Calm comes from work completed well enough that hunger, storage, and morning labor have all been considered. A prepared household needs enough order for the next day to begin without immediate confusion. Teotihuacan drew people and materials from across Mesoamerica. Archaeologists have identified neighborhoods with strong connections to Oaxaca, the Gulf Coast, Maya regions, and other areas. Pottery styles, burial practices, architecture, isotopic evidence, and imported objects reveal mobility and difference. The city was not culturally uniform, even when its grid and architecture created a powerful shared setting. Cosmopolitan life is preserved not as a crowd of labels, but as repeated contact between people, objects, and habits. The so-called Merchants Barrio and Oaxaca Barrio are modern archaeological labels, useful but incomplete. They indicate concentrations of foreign connections rather than perfectly sealed ethnic districts. Individuals could marry, move, trade, learn languages, and participate in more than one community. The night should preserve complexity, instead of turning each neighborhood into a simple costume or stereotype. Archaeological categories help organize evidence, yet lived identity was almost certainly more layered than the labels suggest. A thin orange jar made in southern Puebla could enter a Teotihuacan household through exchange. Marine shell found in a commoner district carried the coast into a highland room. Polychrome pottery and carved stone objects show that non-elite residents could sometimes access fine or distant goods. Such objects made the wider world tangible without making every household wealthy. The rarity of a distant object can make it meaningful without turning it into a treasure owned by everyone. Difference could be heard as well as seen, though the city's languages remain uncertain. Teotihuacan left no deciphered historical account explaining its speech, and several languages may have circulated among residents and visitors. A compound near evening could therefore contain varied accents, words, or ritual vocabularies. The phrases themselves are unrecovered, while architecture and artifacts still demonstrate sustained contact among people from different regions. As households withdraw indoors, the cosmopolitan city becomes intimate. A foreign-made vessel sits beside a local grinding stone. Shell rests near obsidian. A remembered route to another region is compressed into an object small enough to hold in one hand. The pyramids make Teotihuacan famous. These quiet juxtapositions reveal why the city was connected. At night, the long routes contract into a room where materials from different landscapes rest beside one another. Religion at Teotihuacan did not exist only on the summits of pyramids. Apartment comps included patios, platforms, shrines, offerings, burials, and painted programs that brought sacred practice into residential space. Neighborhoods could also possess their own temples and plazas. The city's ritual landscape therefore operated at several scales, from enormous public monuments to small household arrangements. Domestic and neighborhood ritual allowed the sacred city to enter rooms that monumental architecture could not physically occupy. Archaeologists recover incense burners, figurines, vessels, censers, greenstone, shell, obsidian, and other materials from ritual contexts. The meaning of any object depends on where and how it was found. A figurine in domestic fill does not by itself establish a nightly ceremony. Context is enough to show sacred presence while preventing ordinary household debris from becoming a precise sequence of invented prayers. Some compounds contain burials beneath floors or within residential space. The dead remain materially close to the living, though practices differed across the city and through time. This closeness can be acknowledged without turning the evening toward fear. A floor may hold family history below it, while daily life continues above, quietly joining ancestry, residence, and place. The floor can support meals, footsteps, craft, memory, and burial history, without those layers becoming contradictory. The murals repeated images of rain, fertility, animals, processions, and offerings suggest a world in which natural forces and social order were deeply connected. Modern scholars disagree about names and interpretations, and older labels can oversimplify the imagery. In the dim room, certainty is unnecessary. Residents knew more about these figures than archaeology can recover. The residents' certainty about their own images must remain distinct from the careful uncertainty of modern interpretation. A small ritual center does not need a dramatic flame or priestly speech. It may be defined by placement. A platform kept clear, a vessel set apart from ordinary use, a figurine facing inward, a patch of wall maintained with care. As the household quiets, sacred space remains woven into domestic space rather than separated from it. Sacred order is felt through attention to placement, cleanliness, separation, and repeated use rather than invented speech. The apartment compounds house communities across generations. Burials and skeletal remains include infants, children, adults, and older people, while room arrangements suggest several household groups under one outer enclosure. Archaeology can identify age and health patterns more easily than it can restore individual voices. The evening, therefore, keeps people unnamed, while allowing different stages of life to shape the space. A household becomes believable when the architecture accommodates vulnerability, instruction, work, recovery, and age together. Children would have learned the compound through repetition, which threshold could be crossed, where sharp flakes must be avoided, which vessel should not be touched, and how to move around adults at work. A small object rolling across plaster or a quick step checked at a doorway is enough to show that the city was not populated only by workers and priests. Careful movement suggests learning without requiring a named child or a specific reconstructed game. Older residents carried practical and ritual memory. They knew repairs, kin relations, obligations, craft sequences, and stories attached to rooms. Physical age did not create one fixed role, and skeletal evidence cannot tell us who instructed whom on one evening. Still, long-lived compounds depended on memory transmitted across generations as much as on stone walls. Memory gives old walls practical meaning, connecting a repair made years earlier to a task performed tonight. Shared rooms required negotiation. Sleeping places, storage, food preparation, craft materials, and ritual objects competed for limited space. Wealthier compounds offered larger or better finished rooms, but even there, proximity shaped life. A person heard another household across a court, met relatives in passageways, and understood that privacy was organized rather than complete. Proximity creates both support and friction, and a truthful city should make room for both without manufacturing conflict. Near sleep, the compound's population becomes visible through absence of movement. A child is no longer crossing the court. An older person's place remains near a wall. Tools and vessels mark the adults who used them. The architecture holds several generations without needing to display them all at once. Stillness reveals the social map indirectly, through the places where movement has ceased and objects remain. Teotihuacan's neighborhoods were not merely collections of houses. They linked production, exchange, ritual, identity, and administration. Some compounds specialized in crafts. Neighborhood centers could coordinate larger activities and connect residents to distant networks. Economic life, therefore, moved through courtyards and rooms as well as through formal markets and public spaces. The neighborhood joins private effort to public scale, making the city productive without reducing every residence to a workshop. The Great Compound, near the Ciudadela, has often been interpreted as a market or exchange center, although its exact function remains debated. A metropolis of this size required regular movement of food, fuel, raw materials, finished goods, and labor. Night paused that circulation rather than erasing it. Expected deliveries, unfinished work, and remembered obligations remained active after public movement thinned. A covered basket and a cleared passage preserved that circulation in miniature. No surviving ledger lists one household's evening obligations. Economic behavior appears instead through tools, production waste, imported wares, storage features, and unequal access to goods. Value moved through materials, labor, relationships, and institutions that are only partly understood. The evidence does not need coins, shop signs, or modern routines in order to show a city organized by exchange. A cluster of flakes and an imported vessel can hold the same history. The neighborhood economy becomes tactile as it slows. Clay is left to dry. Obsidian waste waits to be sorted. Pigment is covered, fiber wound, food stores protected, and a basket placed beside tomorrow's work. Specialization means that every compound depends on labor beyond its walls. The quiet room therefore remains connected to many unseen hands. Tomorrow's exchange is already present in the way these objects are arranged. By darkness, exchange has become expectation. A missing delivery, a promised repair, or a tool required tomorrow may remain unresolved without becoming a crisis. The compound closes around what it has. The city continues to function because thousands of households can stop for the night without abandoning the larger pattern that will reconnect them in the morning. Rest is possible because the urban system can tolerate a pause and resume its exchanges after daylight returns. Outside the residential compounds, the great monuments have become darker than the sky. Their height remains, but carved and painted details disappear. The Pyramid of the Sun is now a broad-stepped mass. The Pyramid of the Moon anchors the avenue without movement. The Feathered Serpent Pyramid holds a more complex history of sculpture, offerings, power, and sacrifice. But this episode does not turn toward those violent dedicatory events. Their silence is architectural, not supernatural, and it settles over the city without demanding fear or revelation. The monuments were already products of earlier generations by 450 CE. Residents inherited them, maintained them, altered surrounding spaces, and built their lives in a city shaped by their presence. Familiarity does not make them small. It changes the quality of awe. A structure can be sacred and ordinary at once when it stands beside the route a person has crossed since childhood. Inherited monuments can belong to daily life while retaining a scale that no household building approaches. Modern visitors often experience Teotihuacan as an open archaeological park dominated by exposed stone. The 5th century city was more crowded, more colorful, and more enclosed. Buildings carried plaster and paint. Residential walls blocked long views. Roofs, platforms, drains, streets, and compounds filled the spaces now read as empty. Visual production must therefore avoid turning the ancient metropolis into a clean field of isolated ruins. Roofs, plaster, paint, smoke, cloth, people, and stored goods must return to any credible image of the living city. Darkness restores some of the density that excavation has removed. It hides distant gaps, joins roof lines, and reduces the avenue to a few planes. The city becomes less visually complete, while remaining historically bounded. Night simplifies the view, but it cannot serve as permission to replace evidence with fantasy. From inside a compound, the pyramids may be invisible. Their importance survives in orientation, memory, ritual, labor, and the city's identity. The most famous structures on the plain do not need to appear in every scene. Their absence from a household room is part of the point. The city beneath the pyramids was large enough to contain thousands of lives that did not spend every moment looking toward them. The unseen monument remains powerful because the household still lives inside the urban order it helped create. Across Teotihuacan, residential compounds settle at different speeds. A workshop stops before a kitchen. A formal patio quiets before a room where fiber is still being wound. A child sleeps while an adult checks a vessel. No signal has been documented that closed every household at 1 hour. The city becomes still unevenly, compound by compound and room by room. Uneven quiet makes the metropolis feel inhabited, because real households do not finish work as one synchronized machine. Small sounds remain. A cooling surface, a cord drawn tight, a jar moved closer to a wall, a foot testing the floor before stepping around sharp waste. Plaster and stone return these sounds in brief echoes. Beyond the outer wall, another household creates its own pattern. The city's quiet is layered rather than empty. Each sound is brief enough to remain local, yet together they show that many lives are still settling. Heat declines in cooking areas. Pigment jars remain covered. Obsidian loses its shine when the light changes. A drain waits for weather that may not come tonight. The painted walls hold images no one needs to inspect again before sleep. Familiarity permits darkness. Objects become safer as they lose movement, and familiar rooms require less light with every completed task. The broad urban grid still exists beyond the entrance, but it no longer demands attention. Streets connect compounds that have temporarily withdrawn from one another. Neighborhood temples, workshops, public plazas, and markets remain in place without active crowds. The city has not vanished. It is resting inside its architecture. The grid continues beyond the wall like a thought that no longer needs to be followed before sleep. Above many courts, the same highland night is visible through different rectangles of sky. No single household owns the city, and no single monument explains it. Teotihuacan endures for this hour as thousands of enclosed communities, each contributing a small silence to the greater one. The shared sky unites the compounds without erasing the walls, histories, and obligations that distinguish them. Centuries from this representative night, the city would change, suffer destruction in parts of its center, lose population, and eventually become a landscape of ruins and memory. Later peoples would return, interpret the monuments, make offerings, and give the place the name Teotihuacan. Those futures are real, but they do not belong inside the rooms of 450 CE. The future is kept brief, so the final minutes remain with the people for whom the city is still whole. For the residents, tomorrow is not archaeology. It is another day of food preparation, repair, exchange, craft, ritual, care, and movement through the grid. The walls are not ruins. The murals are not fragments. The compounds are not excavation plans. Their world is incomplete only to us. Their present is made of complete walls and ongoing obligations, not of the absence through which modern visitors know them. A small light narrows against painted plaster. The visible part of a feathered form becomes a red line, then disappears. In another room, an obsidian edge has already been covered or placed beyond careless reach. Water rests inside clay. A grinding stone is still. The court holds darkness where rainwater sometimes moves. The room reaches darkness through the disappearance of details, rather than through a single dramatic extinguishing. Beyond the compound, the pyramids remain without requiring witness. Their steps hold no final answer for the night. The city's deepest achievement is not only their height, but the ordinary urban life spread around them. Households sharing walls, crafts moving through neighborhoods, strangers becoming residents, and courtyards holding generations beneath the same open sky. Ordinary urban life gives the monuments their context, scale, and human cost, without becoming subordinate to them. The original name of the city is gone. The names of most people who slept here are gone as well. Yet the arrangement of their care remains, a passage kept clear, a vessel protected, a sharp flake gathered, a wall repaired, a child guided inward. The pyramids darken above the valley. Inside the compounds the ancient city rests, and the night needs no name. What remains most clearly is not a mystery, but the quiet intelligence required to make shared life continue.